The evening had started like any other pre-wedding discussion, quiet and careful, with Daniel smiling nervously and Austin Palmer leaning back in his chair as if the world revolved around him. Then it happened. Austin waved a hand at my longtime friends and associates, the people who had helped me build my life from the ground up, and said with a smirk, "We only want important people at this wedding, not your friends." Daniel froze, uncertain, caught between wanting to defend me and not wanting to offend his fiancée. Elena Palmer, by his side, nodded as though in agreement, her eyes glinting with social ambition. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my friends or myself. I simply nodded slowly, letting a calm smile settle on my face. But inside, a fire ignited, a controlled, deliberate fire. This wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal of 35 years of hard work, of every relationship I had cultivated, of every late night, every contract signed, every reputation earned. Austin had underestimated me, misjudged the power of respect earned through dedication rather than inherited wealth. And in that instant, I realized that patience, observation, and strategy would be my tools. I allowed him to finish, unaware that the very act of excluding my people had given me the moral and practical justification to act. For Daniel, for the friends and colleagues who had stood by me, and for the life I had painstakingly built, the stage was set. Tomorrow, everything could change, and I would make sure it did. Next, I began tracing the patterns of his dismissals, documenting each slight, and planning my measured response. It had been months, really, that the pattern had been forming. I remembered the first time Austin had suggested I might want to upgrade my wardrobe for the rehearsal dinner, handing me a business card for his family's tailor. "It's nothing personal, Vivian," he had said, "but you'll be meeting important people." I had smiled politely, sliding the card into my purse, noting how every word dripped with condescension. By April, his exclusions became more deliberate. Invitations for my longtime friends from the community were quietly rescinded. The men and women who had helped me build my real estate business, who had stood by me through years of contracts, deadlines, and late nights, were now deemed inappropriate for the wedding. Daniel barely spoke during these conversations, his eyes fixed on his fiancée, silent as if his love required him to accept every slight. And Elena, always polished, always aware of appearances, nodded with approval, as if the entire world existed to serve her ambitions. I watched quietly, cataloging every word, every nuance, every dismissal. Each small cut, each overlooked gesture added up to a pattern I could no longer ignore. This was about control, about social climbing, and about erasing the people who mattered most to me. I realized then that my response had to be strategic. Quick or reactive action would play into Austin's hands, but measured, deliberate moves, plans built on relationships I had cultivated for decades, could turn this insult into leverage. My people were more than guests. They were allies, witnesses, and, if necessary, instruments of justice. I began compiling mental notes connecting names, venues, and favors. Each slight was a breadcrumb, and I intended to follow them all the way. The investigation would begin quietly, but its consequences would not be. Next, I would uncover the hidden cracks in Austin's perfect facade. I had always trusted my instincts, and something about Austin Palmer had been nagging at me for months. The little inconsistencies in his stories, the vague answers about his work, the way he avoided questions about finances, all of it set off alarms I couldn't ignore. Daniel brushed off my concerns, trusting his fiancée without hesitation, but I couldn't. I had spent a lifetime building a business, a reputation, and a network. I knew when people were hiding something. The first step was discretion. I reached out to Marcus Webb, a private investigator I had worked with years ago. Quietly, I asked him to review everything SEC filings, banking records, and any public legal notices related to Palmer Investment Group. I needed a complete picture before taking any steps that could escalate into confrontation. Marcus was methodical, thorough, and discreet, exactly what this situation required. Within days, the pieces began to fall into place. Austin wasn't just evasive, he was hiding serious financial problems. Gambling debts stacked high, transfers that didn't add up, client funds misappropriated. It became clear there was a pattern of embezzlement, likely ongoing, for months. The man I had once considered a polite, if entitled, young businessman was a risk not only to himself, but to my family and our community. Balancing moral obligation with strategic patience became my focus. Acting too soon could alert Austin, give him a chance to cover his tracks, or even manipulate Daniel further. Waiting too long, however, risked letting him continue unchecked. I began mapping out a careful plan, noting every venue, every contact, every opportunity to exert leverage discreetly. My people, my friends, associates, and those who had helped me build my life would be part of this plan, though they remained unaware for the moment. As I reviewed the preliminary reports from Marcus, I realized that the stage was set not for a minor confrontation, but for a complete unraveling of Austin Palmer's carefully curated image. The next step was to see just how deep his deception ran, and to prepare for the consequences that would inevitably follow. With the knowledge Marcus had gathered, I began quietly activating the network I had spent decades cultivating. Every contact, every relationship I had built through years of work became a tool for what needed to happen. Venue managers I had helped renovate, planners who had seen me deliver flawless events under impossible deadlines, suppliers who had trusted me through tight schedules. They all now had a reason to act in ways that would shift the balance. I started with the simplest moves, first confirming bookings, checking schedules quietly, reminding my contacts of obligations and prior favors. I didn't need to explain the entire situation. Professionalism and subtle persuasion were enough. Each conversation planted the seeds of contingency. Should Austin's plans proceed too confidently, the venues and resources he counted on would suddenly be unavailable. By the end of the week, I had quietly confirmed cancellations and backup obstacles that would appear to him as random misfortune. Austin remained blissfully unaware. In his mind, the wedding was secure, the $190K event unfolding exactly as planned. He saw no threat because he assumed I was powerless, a polite figure with no real sway. He underestimated not only me, but the value of decades of loyalty, trust, and mutual respect that I had cultivated with everyone in our community. Daniel continued to trust blindly, asking occasionally if I had any concerns, and I smiled politely, careful not to alarm him. Elena, as expected, remained focused on appearances and social validation, blind to the web forming around her. I cataloged every relationship, every past favor, and every subtle influence I could call upon, if necessary. Every individual was part of the larger plan, though none of them knew the full scope. The careful orchestration of my network was not just about leverage, it was about precision and timing. By the end of the day, I stepped back and reviewed the strategy, confident that the next moves would be unstoppable. The stage was almost set, and Austin Palmer had no idea how precarious his perfect wedding truly was. Next, I began gathering the hard evidence that would solidify my leverage and ensure his facade could no longer hold. I spent the next several days compiling every piece of evidence Marcus had uncovered, carefully organizing banking records, SEC filings, client statements, and gambling receipts into a comprehensive file. Each document revealed another layer of Austin Palmer's recklessness, the hidden cracks beneath the polished surface he showed the world. The numbers told a story that words alone could not embezzled funds transfers to cover gambling losses and client accounts drained under the guise of investment strategy. While I reviewed the documents, I began subtly hinting to Clara that something was amiss. I didn't want to alarm her unnecessarily, but small questions about timing, inconsistencies in Austin's explanations, and gentle observations about behavior planted seeds of doubt. Clara listened at first politely, then with increasing curiosity. She had trusted him blindly, but she was beginning to notice the gaps and contradictions I had observed for months. The contrast between my earned respect and Austin's inherited privilege became painfully clear. Every client, every partner, every friend I had built a relationship with over decades had trusted me because I had proven my worth through action, through reliability, through honesty. Austin, by contrast, depended on his family name and social position, assuming it shielded him from accountability. I kept the file organized not just as evidence, but as a tool, knowing when the time came, it would allow me to dismantle his facade completely. The pattern of deception, the hidden manipulations all pointed to one truth. The man judging my life and dismissing my friends as unimportant had no idea who he was really dealing with. As I closed the final folder, I felt the weight of what was to come. The next step would require both patience and precision, moving from quiet investigation to active strategy. The first calls came early in the morning. A quiet voice on the other end of the line explained that the venue Austin had reserved was suddenly unavailable due to unexpected maintenance. I listened, expressing sympathy, while knowing the timing was no coincidence. It was the first in a series of dominoes I had arranged, each piece falling precisely when it needed to. As the hours passed, more calls arrived. Backup venues meticulously chosen to ensure Austin's perfect day were suddenly booked or closed for private events. Every space he counted on to salvage the $190K wedding vanished. By mid-afternoon, the panic in his voice over the phone was unmistakable. He had spent months planning this event, relying on assumptions and inherited privilege, and now the foundation he trusted was crumbling. Daniel's uncertainty began to show. He called me during one of Austin's frantic attempts to secure another venue. "Mom, how is this happening? Can this really be a coincidence?" His voice wavered, a mixture of frustration and doubt. I kept my tone calm, reminding him only that luck and preparation often intersect in unexpected ways. Slowly, he began to recognize that the perfect image Austin projected might not be what it seemed. Elena's role in the manipulation also became increasingly apparent. Her carefully curated approvals and subtle dismissals of my friends had contributed to the chaos, and Daniel's growing awareness of her influence created a silent tension between them. I noted every reaction, every misstep, understanding that the cracks in their alliance were widening with each failed call and unavailable venue. The $190K wedding, once a shining symbol of Austin's ambition, was now a fragile illusion. Every cancellation, every closed door served as a reminder that control is never absolute and that the smallest shifts can have monumental consequences. I watched the situation unfold quietly, my decades of planning and network leverage now producing visible results. By evening, the dominoes had aligned almost perfectly, and Austin Palmer had begun to understand, though he refused to admit it, that his perfect world was unraveling. The next step would be a direct confrontation, one that would force the truth into the open and test his composure in ways he had never imagined. I asked Austin to meet me at my office under the pretense of discussing final details for the wedding. He arrived 30 minutes early, impeccably dressed, exuding confidence, completely unaware of what awaited him. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, and he hesitated, as if the room itself demanded a certain respect he hadn't expected to encounter. Once seated, I placed the manila folder in front of him. The thick stack of documents gleamed under the overhead light, each page a record of his misdeeds bank statements, showing unauthorized transfers, SEC filings detailing inquiries into Palmer Investment Group, and receipts revealing the scale of his gambling debts. I watched his expression shift slowly, the mask of entitlement cracking, though he tried to maintain composure. "This," I said evenly, tapping the folder, "is the picture of the person who believes he can judge others while hiding crimes behind his name. I have detailed everything: your transfers from client accounts, gambling losses, and the formal investigations that are already underway." He leaned back, attempting to reclaim control, but I could see the tension under his polished exterior. For the first time, Austin Palmer understood that his inheritance and connections meant nothing without credibility, and that his carefully constructed facade could be dismantled by someone he had underestimated. Daniel stood just behind Austin, silent, absorbing every word. He had grown up trusting that love and ambition could smooth over character flaws, but witnessing this confrontation illuminated the difference between appearance and reality. He saw in real time the consequences of deception and the value of integrity, and it was clear why I had waited, watched, and gathered proof. Austin's voice shook slightly as he asked if I intended to expose him publicly. I remained calm. My leverage wasn't built on threats or emotion. It was rooted in facts, relationships, and years of earned trust. The room itself seemed to tilt in my favor, every past slight and dismissal returned tenfold in this controlled, deliberate moment. By the end of the conversation, Austin's confidence had been replaced by uncertainty, and he truly knew, that his position had shifted irreversibly. The next step would be to reveal the full extent of his deception to the broader circle, ensuring that the chaos of his unraveling would leave no part of his carefully crafted image intact. The day of the wedding arrived with an air of anticipation, though not the kind Austin had expected. Guests arrived in their carefully selected attire, unaware that the carefully orchestrated illusion of perfection was about to crumble. I positioned myself quietly, Daniel at my side, while our closest friends and associates filled the back rows, loyal and attentive. Austin arrived in his polished suit, exuding the confidence of someone who believed the day was entirely under his control. He paused at the sight of the crowd, a flicker of unease passing across his face, though he quickly masked it with a practiced smile. The ceremony area was arranged as planned, but the atmosphere had shifted. The elegance of wealth could not hide the tension now simmering beneath the surface. As the proceedings began, I took a deep breath and began to speak. I laid out the facts step by step: unauthorized client transfers, embezzlement gambling debts, and the SEC investigation already underway. Each statement landed with quiet authority, the weight of evidence undeniable. Austin's face went pale, and he realized that every guest now understood not only the scope of his crimes, but also the moral inversion he had created by attempting to erase those he considered unimportant. Law enforcement officers, quietly positioned among the guests, moved with discretion but undeniable presence. Austin's sense of control unraveled as he saw the consequences he had long assumed he could avoid. The people he had dismissed, my friends, my associates, those who had built lives of integrity alongside me, were now recognized, their importance undeniable. Immigrant families, loyal colleagues, and community partners were honored in the space he had tried to dominate, while his old money connections looked on silent, witnessing the collapse of his carefully curated image. Daniel watched closely, absorbing the lessons of integrity and the power of earned respect. He saw how influence built through trust, honesty, and relationships could surpass inherited wealth, and how one person's moral clarity could dismantle a false hierarchy. By the end of the event, Austin Palmer's reputation had been irrevocably damaged, and the social order he believed unassailable had shifted completely. The next phase would involve addressing the personal fallout, ensuring that justice extended to those harmed, and guiding Daniel through the decisions he now had to make with this newfound clarity. After the public reckoning, Daniel and I found a quiet moment away from the crowd. He was tense at first, his mind replaying every detail of Austin's deception and the sudden collapse of the wedding he had thought would be perfect. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between the allure of social status and the reality of integrity. "Mom," he said, "finally, I understand now. Everything I thought mattered, the appearances, the connections, they mean nothing compared to what we've built here. What you've taught me about honesty and loyalty is the only thing that truly lasts." His voice carried both relief and resolve. I nodded, proud that he had absorbed the lesson without needing it forced upon him. We spoke at length about the importance of relationships, the kind that endure through decades of work, trust, and mutual respect. I reminded him that wealth and inheritance may open doors, but they do not define character. The people who had stood with us, friends, colleagues, families who had been loyal through thick and thin, were the true measure of success. Daniel listened carefully, absorbing each word, and I could see the weight lifting from his shoulders. Elena, too, had remained nearby, her posture shifting subtly as she watched the aftermath. She began to recognize the consequences of her own complicity in Austin's manipulations and the reality of the harm their choices had caused. Though hesitant, she approached seeking understanding and quietly acknowledging the lessons she had ignored. By the time the evening settled, family unity had been restored in a way that felt authentic and lasting. The sense of relief was not just in avoiding a disaster, but in knowing that the values we upheld, honesty, loyalty, and earned respect, had guided us through the chaos. With the crowd dispersed and the immediate crisis behind us, I knew there was still work to do, helping Daniel navigate his future decisions with clarity and ensuring that the families affected by Austin's actions were supported. The next step would be to put those lessons into action, solidifying both justice and the integrity of our family. The following Monday, Austin Palmer was formally arrested, his actions laid bare for all to see. The wedding that had once been the centerpiece of his ambitions no longer existed, canceled entirely, and replaced with a clear message: deceit and greed have consequences. I watched the news reports, quietly satisfied that the truth had prevailed and that justice was unfolding for the families who had suffered from his recklessness. Daniel, having absorbed the lessons from the past days, approached me with a determination I had rarely seen. "Mom," he said, "I want to be part of something meaningful. I want to help people the way you've always taught me to." He joined my company overseeing community and philanthropic projects, ensuring that our work reached beyond business into real, lasting impact. His choices reflected not ambition for status, but the values he now understood: honesty, loyalty, and responsibility. We began reaching out to the families affected by Austin's fraud, assisting in recovering what they could and providing support where it was needed. It was never about revenge. It was about restoring balance and reinforcing the lessons of integrity. Each family we helped was a reminder that the power of earned respect far outweighed the empty influence of inherited wealth. In the quiet moments afterward, I reflected on what had transpired. Revenge, I realized, was never the goal. True satisfaction comes from living well, protecting your family, and teaching the next generation that values, character, and relationships matter more than money or social status. As Daniel and I reviewed plans for upcoming community initiatives, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter grounded in integrity, purpose, and the enduring strength of family. The lessons of the past weeks would guide us forward, shaping our legacy and the lives we touched.